Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the AIA Contract Documents webinar, Payment Applications and Change Order Forms, What You Should Know. My name is Hasti Hijazi. I have a few administrative items to go through before we get started. All attendees are currently muted. Please use the chat or question feature in your GoToWebinar window on the right-hand side to ask any questions. At the end of the presentation, time permitting, we will read and answer any questions. This course is eligible for one AIACES learning unit. When you registered for the course, you entered your AIA member number, and we'll use that information to report your credit directly to the AIA within 2 business weeks of the training date. You will also receive the recording of today's webinar, along with the PowerPoint and any additional resources and information within this week. So by the end of the week, you will receive a follow-up email from AIA Contract Documents with the recording and materials from today's course. And with that, I will go ahead now and turn it over to our first presenter, Mike Bamba.
Thank you, Hasti, and thank you everyone for attending. We appreciate the time. My name is Mike Bamba. I am a director and counsel with the AIA Contract Documents team. I've been with the AIA for 13 years, and I've worked on a number of different documents in our library, including some of the A201 editions, as well as most of the owner-architect documents that we've worked on, and some of our IPD documents and digital practice documents. But today we'll be going over our payment applications and change order forms. And so for the real expertise on those documents, I have Ben Siegel with me here, and I'll let Ben introduce himself.
Hi, my name is Ben Siegel. I'm Manager of Contract Documents Information here at the AIA. So I answer content and usage questions about our many documents, and a large part of that is talking about the payment applications and change orders. I've been with the AIA for a long time as well, since 2005, and so I'm very familiar with these forms. They are deceptively simple, but there are a lot of little wrinkles, and that's what we're going to go over today.
Great, thanks, Ben. Before we get into the meat of the program, we have a few preliminary slides to go over. First, our copyright standard slide that the presentation is protected by copyright, so please don't reproduce it. And as Hasti mentioned, this program is eligible for 1 learning unit, and we will, I believe we collected your information prior to this presentation, and we will report your attendance to the AIA directly, and I think it usually shows up within a couple of weeks on your transcripts. So, as far as learning objectives go, we're going to take a look at each party's responsibilities and what the expectations are for the change order and payment application process. We're going to be doing a live demo of how all of these forms work. So Ben will walk you through a few of the common circumstances and questions that we get on each of these documents. And one of the most common questions we get is, how do you deal with retainage in the G702 and G703? And that requires a discussion of the difference between fixed rate retainage and variable rate retainage. Basically, fixed rate is when you have one rate that applies to everything. Variable rate is when you have multiple different rates, or one different rate standing out from all the others. But we'll go over that in more detail as we go through this program. So hopefully at the end you'll have a little better feel on how quick and easy it is to complete these documents and how you can use them in your practice. And then a little more background on the contract documents program itself. The AIA Contract Documents has been around since 1888. Our first document that we published was the Uniform Contract, and it was actually an owner-contractor agreement, an owner-architect agreement. And that's been, I think the math on this is wrong. I think it's 131 years now. I guess we should update this slide. But, we started with the 1 form, and as the practice and construction industry has evolved, so has our library. We now have around 200 agreements and forms. And because we've been around for so long, the LexisNexis has actually published a legal citator that tracks case law throughout the country that references AIA contracts. So it's a good resource out there for all the lawyers. But in terms of our purpose, our purpose is to draft fair and balanced documents. That's one of our drafting principles. But of course, that involves balancing various competing interests among the various project participants. And our goal is to put the risk where it can best be managed. Oftentimes that's with insurance that's purchased for projects, but other times it has to rest with one of the parties on the project. Our drafting process is fairly involved. It takes a good amount of time to revise each of our documents. The most recent revision of the A201 document from beginning to end took around 3 years. That's because we are pretty inclusive in terms of review and comment from the industry. So our first step is to get initial comments on the existing draft, review legal decisions, investigate the impact, do at least 1 or 2 drafts and send those drafts out for comment to get feedback from various liaison groups in the industry, and then go through the final publication process. So, I mentioned our documents committee, and they are key to our program. The documents committee consists of around 30 architect members, AIA members, and they serve a 10-year term. So it's a pretty committed group, and you would think it's hard to get people to serve 10 years, but actually it's harder to get people to stop serving after 10 years. We find that to be more often the case. But the result of having such a committed group is that we have a pretty fully developed set of documents. And this slide it shows the breakdown of how our documents are structured. They're structured by family and series. So we have a number of different families of documents, mostly focused on the delivery model. Conventional design, bid, build, design, build, CM advisor, constructor, so on. And then within each of the families, we have series of documents. So it begins with an A, it's an owner-contractor agreement. B is owner-architect agreement, and so on. But we're going to be focusing on forms. So our form family all have a G as their first, as the first letter in their title. And specifically, we're going to be focusing on the applications for payment and the continuation sheet, as well as the change order. As Ben indicated, those are popular documents in terms of user questions, because they're very functional and they're used a lot in the industry. And so we do get a fair amount of questions on some specific things. So the G702 and the G703 are part of our project administration forms, and in short, they reflect the payment process, not outlined in the A201 2007, but the one outlined in 2017, which quite honestly didn't change much from 2007 to 2017. So the G702 is the actual application. It serves 2 purposes. It's an application that the contractor sends to the architect and the owner, and it has a spot for the architect to certify what is due and owing to the contractor. So it's an application and certificate for payment. The G703 is the related document. That's where the contractor will break down the contract sum and show the progression of the work from the last payment application that was submitted. Now, as I said, the forms reflect the process that's set forth in the A201. There's nothing in the A201 that requires anyone to use the G702 and G703. But if you use the G702 and G703, then your application for payment will be consistent with the requirements that are set forth in the A201. So Section 9.3.1 says that the contractor is required to submit an itemized application for payment to the architect. The G703 allows the contractor to itemize everything in its payment application. Section 9.4.1 then requires the architect within 7 days of receiving that application to issue an owner issue to the owner its certificate for payment, indicating how much is due to the contractor. So you'll see when we get into showing the actual G702 that there's a space for the architect to make that certification. And then once the owner has received the architect's certificate for payment, that's when payment is triggered. So making use of that process ensures that everything has been satisfied and you're moving toward actually having payment approved and made. This is just a screenshot of the G702, and Ben's going to go into this in much more detail, but I just wanted to point out that the relationship of the G702 and the G703. G702 references the G703 for a lot of the information that populates this section of the payment application form, which is where the calculation occurs for what the current payment due happens to be. This is a screenshot of the G703, again, just showing you what it looks like before we get into all the details. But as you can see, it allows for an itemization of the contract sum, as well as a way for the contractor to indicate how much work has been completed during this period, what materials are stored on site, and what's the total completed and stored to date, as well as if there is a variable retainage rate, what that rate is, or what that retainage is for each line item. And again, Ben will go over that in much more detail in a few minutes. Now, there's a spot on the G702 for the contractor to essentially certify that what it is submitting, at least to its information and belief, is accurate, and that amounts paid by the contractor for the work on previous certificates for payments were issued, essentially paid to the sub. The language on this form is consistent with what is the language that's required in A201. So again, just effectuating that A201 payment process. Similarly, when you get to the architect's certificate of payment, again, this is just a zoomed in screenshot of the G702. You have language that's consistent here with what the architect is required to certify, that to the best of the architect's knowledge, information, and belief, the work is progressed as indicated, etc. It also allows for the architect to indicate the amount that is certified. Just because the contractor's payment application is for one amount, if the architect doesn't determine that the work has been completed in accordance with the contract documents to the extent indicated in the payment application, it can certify a different amount. And so there's a spot for the architect to do that. And then the architect will sign and date it. So that is just a brief overview of the two documents. It's worth noting that we have different versions of the G702. We have one to effectuate the payment process in our construction manager as advisor documents. We also have a subcontractor version of the G702. And I only point that out to note that the G702 process permeates a few different families in our documents. But if you're familiar with how the G702 works, you'll be familiar with how those documents work, because at least in their inner workings, they're essentially identical to the G702. They just have to accommodate the slightly different project setups that are present in a construction manager as advisor, specifically the presence of a construction manager as advisor in their role in the payment process. And then obviously a subcontract variation, you're changing the names of the parties. And then same for the G703, there is a subcontractor version, but again, the form actually operates the exact same way that it does for the non-subcontractor version. So I'm going to turn it over to Ben now, and he's going to go through a live demonstration on how to complete G702, G703 under various different scenarios, and then we'll turn our attention back to the change order form.
Okay, I'm getting logged in right now. So I'm going to talk about the pay apps first, and then, as Mike said, we'll go over the change orders next. There are a lot of different forms. Let me actually go over to the template library and just point out very quickly that we have a lot of these G-series forms. So if we sort by G-series, you can see we have a wide variety of forms, and so we are only focused on a few of them. And even if you look at the change orders and payouts, you can see that there are different versions. So there's this S version, as Mike mentioned, for a subcontractor, for both, and there's also design build and CMA, which is construction manager advisor, and that's just within the 3 forms we're talking about today, the change order, payment app, and continuation sheet. But then we also have other forms like architect's field report, proposal request, that sort of thing, construction change directive, CCD, a lot of those types of common forms as well. So let's go ahead and get into it. So when you're in a project, you create a document in a project. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this, but we are in the online system. So here we have a project, we have our information there, and we want to create a document in that project. So starting with the pay apps, we're going to go with the G703 first, the continuation sheet. So I'm actually going to do this first. This pop-up box is very important for all of these forms that we're talking about today. So you're creating a new document each time, and you're importing the data. So for my G703, I can import from the prior pay period if there is one. So I can do that. If it's my first pay period, then obviously this is not going to be. You obviously can't do that. Let me cancel out of this really quickly and let's see here. Let me go back to projects. Sorry about that. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go to a different project here. So here's my project, and go to view all documents. You can see there's nothing else here. So I'm doing my first pay period. So again, I go to create document. Sorry about that, I was in the wrong project before. So now there won't be any prior ones. So I'm going to go to my G703. Now I can't import because there's nothing prior. This is my first pay period, so nothing to import from. And I'm already in the project. So I just click OK, and it creates the form. So this is what it looks like. Obviously, it's just columns and rows. That's really all it is. You can add row and delete row here at the bottom. I'll delete some rows just to make it a little more visible. So just to go through each column really quickly, and you also have application number and application date, the period, and if the architect is a project number, you have this information at the top here. But just to go through the columns, you have item number. This can be sequential, like 1, 2, 3, or it can be some sort of numbering system. CSI has something that they call master format. CSI is the Construction Specifications Institute. They have something they call master format, which is a numbering and titling system. You can use the master format numbers or any type of numbers that you want, really, or it could just be sequential, as I said. So it can be 1, and 2, and 3, just for purposes of this demonstration. So for description of work, that can be obviously anything. And let me go ahead and save it first. This is also another important point. You're saving online, so you can save before anything else. Okay, now I know that it's saved. So again, description of work is just a description of whatever the work is. Then we get into scheduled value, and that's just the dollar amount of the total scheduled value for that item. And then we have columns D and E, which are work completed. D is from the prior application, and then E is from this period. So for my first pay period, obviously this is going to be 0. And then for this period, it's going to be some amount. And so if I've done some, some work on this, I can put in a number there. And then you see as soon as I do that, it pops up in these columns, the total completed and stored to date, which is D plus E plus F. So these white fields are calculations, meaning I can't actually type here. I type in the gray fields, and then it gives me totals in the white fields. So then moving along, we have store material. So this is, as it says, materials presently stored that are not included in the work completed in D or E. So if I have some amount of stored material, I can put it here, and then again, it'll add up, and it'll give me a percent of completion, and it'll give me a balance to finish. And so again, all of this is automatically calculated. And then for retainage, this is only used for a variable rate. So if you had a variable rate, you would put in the dollar amount of that item. And so you would have to calculate and put the dollar amount in column I for every single line item. Otherwise, if it's a fixed rate, you can just leave it alone. So let's assume a fixed rate for now, and I'll just leave it alone. And so you go through, I'll just go ahead and save this and close it. But you go through every line item this way. And also, if you have a change order, you would just treat that as a line item. I'm not going to fill all these out, but you just go through and just fill out all your line items. And if you have a change order that pops up, you just treat it as a separate row, a separate line item. Go ahead and close this. Okay, there we go. Okay, so now we have it saved here. This is the Adobe symbol. That means that it's a PDF. It's something else that I had here. And then this symbol tells you that it's an online draft. So I'm working online here. For the agreements, we work offline in Microsoft Word. That's not what we're doing today. These forms are saved online. So that's tells you what the number is. It's an online form. It's G703, form draft 1. So that's great. Now we're ready to create our G702. So again, we go here. There's going to be another pop-up box. You see that the first thing is we can choose fixed or variable. So I'm going to choose fixed in this case. Same project. There's no prior G702, so I can't import here. But in subsequent pay periods, you do import from the prior one. I can, however, import from the previous G703, meaning the one that I just did. So let's import from that and click OK. And now when you have multiple project participants, then they are, it'll ask you which member. So you just select those and it knows to put those in. So I've already filled out my project, and that's where this stuff comes from at the top. The owner's name and address, the contractor's name and address, the name of the project, the architect's name and address, all this stuff. So you fill all these things out. Application number, period, contract for, the construction date, construction contract date, all these sorts of things. Then to go and start with the very first line, with most of these things, you just have to be very careful and meticulous. So this is the original contract sum. So this again comes from the project data, just like this other stuff. I put in a project amount before I did this. What you have next is net change by change orders. You can see this field is white, so I can't change it. The reason for that is because at the bottom, this is where I do my change orders. So if I had a change order, let's say it was from this month, since nothing's prior. I'll just put in some numbers here. So you just put in additions, you put in deductions, you put it in the row for prior period or for this period. And you're just putting numbers in these gray fields. It'll calculate a total, which it'll then put up into line 2. These numbers obviously are not going to match. I'm just putting in random numbers. But so the process for change orders is that you list each change order as a line item in G703, as I mentioned, and then you just have to summarize them here in this box at the bottom. Additions, deductions. You do not put a minus sign. It knows that a deduction is a negative, and you can see that it gets a total total net, and it puts that here at the top. And then it just takes these two numbers, line 1 and line 2, and adds them together. Line 3, also a white field, so nothing there. And that is the contract sum to date. Then line 4 is the total completed and stored to date. And this comes from column G on the G703. So because I told it to import, it just imported that number, nice and neat, and that's what that is. The total completed, all the work completed, prior period and this period, and also store material. That's what this number represents. Line 5 is retainage. So retainage is an amount that is retained, is withheld through each progress payment, and then at some point it's released. So for this one, we have a fixed rate of retainage. So I have to put in the fixed rate percentage here in 5A and 5B. So let's say it's 10%. Put that there, and let's say that it's 5% of store material and 10% of completed work. So I put this number here, and it's adding the work completed columns, D and E. So it's taking, in this case, 10% of that and giving a total. And then for store material, it's doing the same thing. It's going to the store material column, which is just one column, column F, on the G703. And you can put in, like I did, a different percentage or the same percentage, whatever. This is a fixed rate percentage of retainage. It calculates for you, and you get a total, and that's what that is. Then, and I'll show a variable rate retainage, but this, as you can see, this is what this is. 5A plus 5B if it's fixed, or total in column I of G703 if it's variable. So that's what that is. And then this next line is total earned less retainage. So this is, again, just a calculation. So it's just simply line 4 minus line 5. Again, all these things tell you what they're supposed to be, so you just simply, read what it is or what it's supposed to be, and then that's what it tells you what it's going to be. And so this is the total earned less retainage, so it's just line 4 minus line 5, total completed and stored to date, minus the retainage, gets you total earned less retainage. Line 7 comes from line 6 from the prior certificate. This is the first certificate, so that's 0. In subsequent pay periods, there will be a line. It'll come from line 6 from the prior. So then you get the current payment due. Again, that's just calculation. Here's the number. And that goes automatically over here into the section that Mike was talking about before, the architect's certificate for payment. This is what the architect is actually certifying. So it assumes that this number, the current payment due, is going to be the same as what the architect actually certifies. If the architect wishes to certify a different amount, they can put a different amount here manually. But this line, or this box over here, is tied to the current payment due. And then the only other line that's left is the balance to finish. Again, a calculation, line 3 minus line 6, and that's just what's left to be done. Let's save again. Okay. Go ahead and close it. So now I have 2 drafts. You'll notice one other little note is, you notice that I didn't finalize. I can finalize by clicking finalize, of course, and that'll create my final document, which will be a locked PDF. But you notice that the importing comes from the draft, so I don't have to finalize before I move on. In general, and especially if you're buying documents individually, you probably want to keep it as a draft as long as possible. If you're buying individually, this is definitely recommended because you can only finalize once per purchase. So be very careful about that and mindful. And again, you don't have to finalize before moving on. So I'm not going to finalize anything right now. I don't have to. At this point, I'm ready to do my next pay period. So let's say a month passes, and I'm ready to do my next G703. So I'm going to create a new document, a new G703. Now, unlike before, I can import from the prior G703. Here's my first one. So I'm going to click OK. It's going to create it. you see that here it is, everything's the same, all my line items are the same. The only thing it's done is this number that was in this period has now moved one column to the left. It's gone from this period to prior period. So that happens automatically. You'll see that the store material did not move. That is because that value might still be store material. So it could still be there and hasn't changed, in which case I would leave it alone and do nothing. If that value or part of that value has been incorporated into the work, let's say it was bricks on a pallet or something like that, that sat under a tarp or something, and then some of those bricks were laid, then you can reduce it and move it into column E. So let's see. Let's say that $25 out of the 100 has been incorporated into the work somehow. So let's reduce that by $25 and put the $25 here. So again, moving it over, this 100 becomes 75, the 0 becomes 25. You notice this doesn't change the totals. So it's not double billing or anything like that. It's still the same balance to finish. And again, if the material is still stored and nothing's been done, you just leave it there. But I'm assuming that I move some of this over from store material into work completed. So as you're going through this pay app, you notice that everything from E goes into D. So you have to go through and update column E for every line item, and potentially update column F, store material, if you even have any store material, and or if that store material has gone through, has actually been incorporated into the work. Let's go ahead and put some value here of store material, or of retainage. So for a variable rate, you just put in a value. I'll just put in a random value there. Let's go ahead and save this. So this is our second, so you can see how it says number 2 here. Save it and close it. And now you can see that I have my G703, the first one, the G702, the first one, and my G703, the second one. So now I'm going to create my second G702. Okay. Okay, this time we'll select variable rate, and I'm going to import. This time there is a previous G702, and there are going to be 2 options for the previous G703. So I want to do both of these imports, and I want to import from the most recent 703, the one I just did, which is the second. So again, import from previous G702 and also import from previous G703, the most recent, and then click OK, creates it. Okay, so here's my G702. So again, it imports the data. The only thing I'm really importing or updating here is if I have any change orders, I can update these. You'll see that it goes from prior month, or from current month to prior month. So it moves from this column, or this row rather, to this row. So you can update this little table with these 4 boxes, and then the only other thing is to update the retainage. You can see that I put in a value in column I, so it just brings that over. This is variable rate retainage. It's just bringing over the total of column I from the G703. So that's all that is. And you can change this number. I can't put anything. You can see this is white over here, so I don't put in a percentage because this is not fixed anymore. This is variable. That's the only difference. Otherwise, that is the process. It's create G703, import from previous pay period if there is one, fill out the table, create G702, import from previous pay period if there is one, and also import from G703, which you can always do, and that's why you do the G703 first. Go ahead and save that. And that is it for the G703 and G702. I'm going to give it back to Mike to talk about the change order process.
Thank you, Ben. All right, moving on to the change order form, which is our G701, and just like the G702 and the G703, what we're talking about here is a form that effectuates the process that is set forth in the A201. We do have other change order forms, but they're all very similar. The differences are just to accommodate for different delivery models. So the G701 applies to a lot of projects within our document system. Excuse me. And we have a few different versions, but all based on the G701 chassis. So you know how this form works, which is a very simple form. You'll understand how all of those other forms work as well. So again, taking a look at the A201 and probably starting with why change orders are important. Well, obviously they're one of the few ways that you can modify the contract document. So once the contract documents are established in the A10 in the owner contractor agreement, and they're defined in the A201, and so the only way you can modify the contract documents is through a modification. And a modification is defined as a written amendment to the contract signed by both the parties, or a change order, a construction change directive, or a written order for a minor change by the architect. So obviously, a change order is extremely important. You want to make sure you get it done correctly so that you can effectively modify the agreement as you need. So the G701 allows for the parties to document the changes in the work that are agreed to by the owner, contractor, and architect. Taking a further look at the requirements for a change order, in the A201, section 7.2.1, a change order is defined as a written instrument prepared by the architect and signed by the owner, contractor, and architect, stating the agreement upon all of the following: the change in the work, the amount of any adjustment to the contract sum, as well as the amount of any adjustment to the contract time. Again, just like G702 and G703, there's nothing in our documents that says you have to use a G701 to issue a change order. Rather, 7.2.1 states the requirements for what you need to do to qualify as a change order under the agreement. But if you use the G701 and you fill out all the areas that are necessary to fill out in that document, then you'll have a change order that satisfies the requirements in the A201. So again, they're not required, but they do match the process set forth in the G701. So that's really it as far as the background discussion on the G701. There's not a whole lot, like I said, to go over. So I'm going to turn it back over to Ben now, and he's just going to run through filling out the G701 and maybe do a couple of scenarios for that document as well. And then we'll kind of wrap things up after this document.
All right, thanks, Mike. So this portion is not going to take nearly as long. So it's the same principle as the pay app. There's no importing from the change order to the pay app directly. As I had said, change orders can happen at any time. So when there's a change order, you do a change order. When there's a pay app, usually every month, you do the pay app, and you account for the change orders on the pay app. So that just goes back, and I just want to reiterate what I'd said before. When you have a change order, you do G701, which I'm going to talk about right now. And then you do have to account for the change order on G703 as a line item of work, and then also on G702 in the change order summary box that I showed you at the bottom of G702. So it's not a direct import, you just keep track of it on the pay apps, and that's how that works. So let's talk about the change order. So doing my first change order. So again, we have this pop-up box that looks similar to what we've already seen in the G703 and G702. This is between contractor and owner. Project is already selected. This is my first change order, so there's nothing to import from. And I'll just do two really quickly. So for my first, there's just nothing to import from. There's nothing prior. Go ahead and click OK. This is the change order. You can see it's a relatively straightforward form. And so you have the information at the top, again, project information, very basic stuff, names and addresses. That's mostly what this stuff is. And then you have this first area here. The contract is changed as follows. And then you have these numbers, these sort of lines, and I'll go over each of those. So this portion is for just any description of the change. This does not have to be dollars and cents. It doesn't have to be money at all. It could be time. It could be literally anything else. It's any sort of change at all. So to fill out this this box, you just simply click this button that says Edit, this little link that says Edit, and you can type in whatever you want. So you can change the font a little bit. You can change the size. Let's go through and make it bigger. So a little bit of formatting you can do in this text, and then you click OK in this pop-up box, and bam, it shows up right there. So again, this can be anything you want. Just be some description. You can format it in a limited sense in that box where you click Edit. And then now we'll get into the dollars and cents portion of it. So we have the original contract sum, or GMP. You can change it to GMP, but we'll say contract sum was. This comes from the project data. So the net change by previously authorized change orders, well, there weren't any previous ones, that's 0, giving us same total. Contract sum prior to this change order, same thing. Now, the contract sum will be, you can say increased, decreased, or stay the same, unchanged, in the amount of, and here's where you put in some dollar value. So if I put that, and then as soon as I hit Tab or click to the next field, it automatically will update with the information here. If I select decrease, it will decrease that amount here. Now you notice, again, I do not want to use a minus sign or parentheses because that'll end up adding. If you subtract by a negative number, it adds. That's the arithmetic here. So again, if it's a deduction, just select decrease and put the amount, and it will automatically put that there. Then the only other section is the contract time. Again, increase, decrease, stay the same by a certain number of days. New date of substantial completion is X date, and that's pretty much it. Then this section below is just for everybody to sign. The architect, contractor, and owner. As Mike mentioned, we have other versions. We have a CMA version that also includes a construction manager advisor. There's also a design build version that just goes from owner to design builder. But the point is everybody signs here. And that's pretty much it. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I'll do another one. Okay. Okay, so the most recent always appears on top. So here's my most recent G701 draft 1. So that's my first change order. So now I'll do a second change order. Same principles as before. Create a new one, a new change order, and I'm going to import from my first. So now this box is clickable. I check it. I import from the first change order. Click OK. It's going to give me the same deal. Select these people. Okay, here's the change order. So now it knows that there was a deduct here, and this does use a minus sign, and then that tells you what the current number is. You can update the numbers. You can update this section, the same box here if you want. Okay, and you just put in the numbers. Increase, decrease, whatever, and that is it. Again, I don't have to finalize, so I just simply save my draft. Always a good idea to do this frequently since you're working online, and then I can close it. I can come back to it. Now I have my 2 drafts. So here I have my 2 change order drafts, and here are the other drafts for the pay apps that I've created. And so now I can come back to these as much as I want. I haven't finalized yet, so nothing's set in stone. And so I can come back to it. I can make some changes if I want to, save it. Eventually I finalize, and then I can move on to the next change order, the next pay period. That's pretty much it. So I'm going to turn it back to Hasti, I guess, and we'll see if there are any other questions we can answer on the phone.
Okay, thank you, Ben and Mike. So we do have some time allotted, so if you have any questions, please let us know. All right. Why can you just add rows and not add columns? I know there are some AIA programs that allow you to add columns.
Okay, so that's talking about the G703, adding columns in the G703, I assume. Is that right? Did it say that, Hasti? Okay.
It doesn't say that.
Okay, I'm pretty sure that's what it is. So the G703 has a set number of columns and a set width. You can't change the column width or add any new columns. You can add rows, so you can add up to 250 rows. I didn't mention that. There is a limit of 250 rows. So I was going to say as many as you want. That's not true. You can add up to 250 rows. So that's how you would deal with change orders. You can't add any columns, though. There's just a space restriction on the form. You can't do anything with the column width or anything like that. One other note, just on a related note, the description of work column, when you type in there, it will expand vertically, not horizontally. So it'll wrap the text, as I guess is the better way to put it. So there's not really a need necessarily to add a new column or change the column width. The description of work column will wrap text. So if that's a concern, but no, you cannot add columns to the G703, only rows.
And just to add to that, if you were to insert columns, it would mess up the equations, calculations, because they are tied to the existing columns, and because it's not a live Excel spreadsheet, you can't. The equations in our forms are locked. You can't edit them. So,
right, and just exactly. And as a general statement, these are forms that we're talking about. This is not an agreement. It's not a Microsoft Word file that you download. A lot of the text is locked. There's very little that you can actually edit in these forms. So you can fill out numbers, you can fill out some fields. You can't really edit the text. There's very little that you can edit, and very little, quite frankly, that you would need to edit. Hopefully, you can get everything done within the restrictions on the form.
Okay, next question. We bill by percent of completion. Can you put in a percent of work completed rather than a scheduled value dollar amount?
No, it works the other way around. It goes from dollar amount and it gives you a percentage. So that's one of those fields. There's the column in G703 for balance to finish, and also a column, the total complete and the store to date, gives you a percentage. So it doesn't go, the calculation, the formula only goes one way. You put in a dollar amount and it calculates a percentage. It does not go the other way.
And even when you're doing work on a percentage basis, you're still under the 8201, you're still required to provide a schedule of values breaking down the overall contract sum. So you should still have a schedule of values based on contract sum amounts to complete that portion of the G7.
Right, but what I think this person is asking is, okay, I've got an item, and to use a very simple example, I got a $1,000 item and it's 25% done. Rather than figuring out what that is, $250, can I just put 25% and have it calculate $250? I think that's what they're asking. The answer is, unfortunately, no. You have to manually figure out what that is. In my simple example, it's easy, but if it were dollars and cents and some crazy number, you have to, unfortunately, whip out your calculator and figure out what that is.
Is it okay to file save as on the G701 and create the next one?
Well, I was doing the save as I was going along, and when you save it for the first time, that's basically the same thing as the save as button. I wouldn't recommend doing the save as in the future because of the way the importing works. So the idea is create a draft, work on the draft, edit it, save it, close it, and when you're happy, finalize. Then the next pay period or the next change order, you're not going back into the previous one. You notice that I didn't reopen anything I'd already done. I created a new document. So you don't create a new document, or I'm sorry, you do create a new document. You don't go back into the old one and do a save as. You're creating a new document every new change order, and also, same principle, every new pay period.
Okay, we've got a lot of questions coming in.
Okay.
So there is not auto calculation for the increase and or decrease in days due to changes in the contract?
In days due to, oh, in the change order?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it just says, that field says the contract sum is, and then you select increase, decrease, or stay the same by, and I think the default is 0, you put in the number. It does not auto increment the date. That is accurate, yes. You have to figure out, okay, well, let's say it's 3 days, and so the date is November 15th, but now it's November 18th. So you would have to do that manually in the change order, yes.
In a cost-plus agreement with no GMP, the contractor simply updates the schedule of values each month as the cost of the work changes. Obviously, by changing the schedule of values, this causes the original contract sum value to change on the 702. This seems incorrect. Shouldn't the original contract sum remain the same and then show a new total? Since change orders aren't typically required in a cost-plus environment, how would this occur?
Okay, so the only thing that's different in a cost-plus situation is replacing the word contract sum with guaranteed maximum price. The only other caveat there is, well, what if you have cost-plus without a guaranteed maximum price? In which case, it would be some control estimate. But you're right, the original contract sum, or the guaranteed maximum price, the contract sum never changes. The original contract sum never changes. What does change, or what could change, is the contract sum to date, or the GMP to date. So yes, the original never changes, period. Original is original. So if you have a cost-plus situation, then you might have a GMP, you might not. If you do not have a GMP, you would have to have some sort of control estimate as the quote-unquote original contract sum. If you did have a GMP, then it's just the GMP is X amount. And if that changes, then that could theoretically change as well, although as the person states, that's rare to have a change order in that situation.
When we prepare a G701 change order, we always reference in the description the change order request received as an exhibit to the change order. When it is finalized, why won't AIA let you combine the G701 PDF with the attached exhibit to become one document?
Okay, so there is a way to do that, just not within the document itself. That's the project manual feature. So again, you're not doing it within Adobe. The final AIA document is a locked PDF. So no, you cannot use that combine or feature or whatever it's called in Adobe. But there is a way to do that, and I'm suspecting we're getting kind of close to time here. Anyway, there's a way to do that. It's called the project manual feature. Maybe we can send that out later.
Absolutely. And if you look within the online service, there is a beginner's guide to single user. The project manual feature is highlighted in there. There's also video tutorials in our help section. There is how to use the project manual feature there. Lastly, we do hold weekly basics training. You can, and I'm going to actually link to our resources and contacts. On our Learn page here, you can access all of our free webinars. There is basics weekly training, and the trainer will go over how to create a project manual. Why does Architect fill out the continuation G703 and not the GC and its sub?
I'm not quite sure what that means. Can I see it?
Typically, the contractor will fill out the G703, attach it to the G702, and submit it to the architect.
Right, yeah, the architect's not normally filling the G703 or G702 out. They're receiving it. As Mike said, the contractor fills it out, the architect is receiving it.
The only portion that the architect fills out in the G702 and G703 is its certification, which is a small portion of the G702.
Right.
And that it just indicates the amount of the payment application that the architect is certifying as due and owing to the contractor.
Right.
I'm an owner working with subcontractors. I'm the owner and contractor. Which forms would work the best for my situation?
If you're also the owner, then I would just say the regular G702 and 703, because the S version is subcontractor to contractor, and if you're a contractor going directly to the owner, you're not really a sub. Mike, do you agree with that?
Yeah, you're not a sub
right.
In that situation.
Yeah.
And the only real difference between the subcontractor variation and the normal G702 and G703 is that you don't, the word contractor is changed to subcontractor and the word owner is changed to contractor. And then the section about architect certificate is deleted because subcontractor payment applications don't go to the architect for review, they just go to the contractor. If you have a situation where you're the owner and the contractor, if you change the 8201, if your contract still says that the architect reviews the payment application, the standard forms would still apply.
I can answer the next question. Are access to these documents and services free? No, they are not, but you can purchase documents one at a time and pay as you go, or you can purchase a subscription, which is an annual subscription to the online service where you access all of our forms and agreements for the year. You can learn more information on our website at aiacontracts.org, and there'll be more information there. Why did Ben use the older versions of the G702 and G703 forms instead of the 2017 that were available?
So the 2017 version is actually the S version. The S stands for subcontractor. So I was using the most current versions, but I was using the contractor to owner versions. The G702S and the G703S are from 2017, and the S stands for subcontractor. So I was using the current version of those forms. The subcontractor version is from 2017. So that's the difference.
How can we treat a underpayment on the payment request?
Oh boy. Well, so everything that I was going over is assuming that you request payment and actually receive that full payment. Now that's obviously not the case. So there are different ways of doing that. We don't have like an official recommendation, but you could adjust. One simple way is on the G702, there's the line that's at line 7 that says less previous certificates for payment, which, as I had pointed out, comes from the prior pay period. You could adjust that. So if it says $1,000 and you were only paid $800, you could manually change that to $800, and it would be that way. It would reflect that. So that's one way of doing it anyway.
When will you update the change order G701 to be imported directly into the Pay app?
I don't think we have plans to do that, just because it's just its own separate animal. So change order is G701, and so that's its own sort of vertical system from prior change order to current change order. And then on the 703, you have a bunch of line items. There's no way to tell what line item is a change order or what isn't. So you have to do it that way. And then you do have to, as I said, manually update the change order summary, which is just a summary of all the change orders. You could have a bunch of change orders, and you have to summarize them on 702. There's really no way to implement all those three together. It's quite frankly complicated enough as it is. So there's just not really a way to do that.
Okay, great. Well, I think we have gone through all of the questions, and we are right at the 4 o'clock hour. Just as a reminder, you will be emailed the recording and the PowerPoint from today's session. You should look to receive that by the end of this week. Your credit will also be reported to the AIA directly if you're an AIA member and you indicated your AIA member number when you registered. Look for that to appear on your online transcript within 2 weeks. If you have any follow-up questions at the conclusion of today's webinar, you can always contact docinfo@aiacontracts.org. Ben actually does manage this line, so you will be talking to Ben and he will get the answers to your questions. If you have any questions about the online service or our subscription options, you can always contact Docs Tech Support at aiacontracts.org. Phone numbers are listed here. With that, I want to thank you all for your excellent questions, and thank you to Ben and Mike for taking the time to present to us today. Have a great rest of the afternoon.